Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Getting into a groove as we approach the middle of January, catching up and presenting to you all of what's going on in the sports world, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we have Wild Card Weekend in the books, wait a second. We do have another game tonight, which everybody knows I'm opposed to. Can we just have the 3 games on Saturday, the 3 games on Sunday? Why scatter it about where you have the 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, and then 1 on Monday night where you still have the Vikings and Rams? So if you haven't had enough football over the last 96 hours, and that includes the college games on Thursday and Friday night, then you must be just as sick as I am when it comes to watching football or sports for that matter. And this is what I love to do. Don't get me wrong, people, but enough is enough. Like the old saying, sometimes too much of one thing is not good for you. And even though it's football and even though it's what we love, but it's a situation where, please, can we just have a timeout here and just exhale a little bit after all the football that we watched here over the last 4 days? But again, that's the NFL just trying to jam it down your throats, as I've said a million times over. And here's the sad part about it. As much as the NFL tries to spread its product thin, you just have to regurgitate or even spit up everything, because what we witnessed here over the last 2 days in particular with the NFL was gag-worthy. Nothing to really write home about. Nothing that you could at least look from a fan's perspective and say, man, that was enthralling, that was thrilling, until you got to last night's game against the Commanders and Buccaneers, which, to think, out of all 5 games that have taken place over Wild Card Weekend, that was the one that's going to stick out. And that's where I'm going to begin here, people, because when we look at this matchup, a lot of people thought that this was maybe ranked at the bottom when we look at all the matchups. Of course, everybody was interested to see what was going to happen with Chargers and Houston, considering Houston was in a bit of a skid where the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh, first-year coach, we all know the storyline there. And granted that that's probably a game that would have been slightly ahead of Commanders and Buccaneers, but Baltimore-Pittsburgh speaks for itself, a rivalry game, as well as the other matchups that took place, whether it was Green Bay and Philly, a rematch of Week 1, Denver, Buffalo. Let's see if the young upstart Broncos with their defense could go into Buffalo and compete. And then, of course, the game last night. And to me, out of all the games, that was the best one, to where you boil it down to that fourth quarter where the Buccaneers looked like they were going to put the game away, and they were unable to do so. This was after the Commanders, late in the game, had a situation where it was 4th and 2 deep in Tampa territory, and they were unable to convert, which was interesting because Dan Quinn, who looks like is this year's Dan Campbell, in the first quarter, after Tampa took the lead and the Commanders had a shot there, 4th and 2, I believe it was at the 20-yard line of Tampa, and they went for it and it was incomplete, where a lot of people would think, why don't you just kick the field goal, tie the game, and then take it from there? And they didn't do so. And I thought that that was a little bit, maybe, I don't want to say over-aggressive, but I understand the perspective of the coach saying that, you know what, we need to get touchdowns as opposed to field goals. And granted, that would have tied the game early on, but I could see where Dan Quinn was telling his team that, we're on the road, and I get it. You want to take the points. You want to tie the game. You want to stabilize the offense to where they could at least maybe gain some momentum based on what Tampa did as far as kicking a field goal to counter with that. But to go back to either the first quarter and then to fast forward to the fourth quarter, I thought it was smart for him to try to go for it. And I understand that the field goal there at that point at 17-13 would have made it 17-16, but the last thing you wanted was Tampa to go down the field and punch it into the end zone to make it 24-16, and then you need a touchdown and a 2-point conversion just to tie. But as it was, despite the fact that Quinn, and I like what he did, he was very assertive and even aggressive, as I mentioned, but just so it had happened that Tampa, with a fumble there, Baker Mayfield, where the Commanders were able to get the ball, back in Buccaneer territory where they punch it into the end zone. They take a 20-17 lead, and you're thinking at that point, now the Commanders are set. If they just get a defensive stop and they're able to thwart the Buccaneers and maybe run out the clock, then they'll go home with a victory. But as it was, they went down the field, Tampa that is, and they converted on a bunch of third downs. They actually went down the field pretty much lightning quick. But then you had a scenario there at the, I believe it was at the Commander 10-yard line, maybe it was at the 8, as I'm going by off the top of my head. And you had a scenario where it was 2nd and short and a 3rd and 1 where they had a delayed snap, it looked like. They went to Bucky Irving. The defense swarmed. They stopped them there. But they had 2 opportunities to get a couple of yards, and the Buccaneers fell short. And I thought it was important for them to get a touchdown there. Mind you, it tied the game as they got a field goal there to make it 20-20 with about 4 minutes to go. But those last 2 plays, I'm sure that the Buccaneers, they're going to be thinking about that as well as the fumble. And based on what Baker Mayfield said in the postgame, some of those errors had come back to haunt him, and it looks like it's going to be the case for the rest of this winter into the spring until training camp. But be that as it may, they tied the game there at 20, even with that missed opportunity there to get a first down, to bleed the clock a little bit and try to get it into the end zone. But then Jayden Daniels, cool as a cucumber, with some big passes there, including some key conversions, whether it's on 3rd down on a big pass play that they had there at midfield, and then the big play there, 3rd and 2, as they're trying to get a first down, bleed the clock even more to set themselves up for a game-winning field goal as time would expire. And sure enough, Zane Gonzalez, the field goal kicker, comes in, doinks it off the upright, and it goes through. Washington wins 23-20 for their first playoff win since 2006 when they won down in Tampa many moons ago. And for the Commanders, you can now officially say, we could talk about all of the big wins that they've had in the regular season, whether it was the Hail Mary win against the Bears, whether it was the big win against Philly late. You want to talk about the game in Dallas where they won late as well, and you sprinkle in a few others throughout the course of the year. Now we could certainly lay to rest Daniel Snyder, the futility of a Commander / prior to that Washington football team, prior to that, as everybody knows, Redskin organization, to where they could finally let out the bad air and bring in the good air. Because they have Dan Quinn, who's resurrected as a coach here. We know about his foibles there in Super Bowl, 51, I believe, when they had the 28-3 lead as he was a member of the Atlanta Falcons, the head coach that is. And then now they get back on the beam here. First year in Washington, 12 wins. Did not win a division. That went to the Philadelphia Eagles, but still a very good regular season nonetheless. And now they punctuated it with a big win under rookie quarterback Jayden Daniels, who in my eyes saved wildcard weekend. Because as I'll go through the rest of the other games, there were no games that went down to the wire. There were no games that were compelling, no theater, no drama, nothing that you could really shake a stick at to say, oh my God, that was a very good game, or a very good quarter for that matter. And at least you got that there with the closeout game Sunday night on NBC, to where now Jayden Daniels has started his legend. Let's see where it goes next week as they'll head to the Motor City on Saturday night. And of course, I'll go through the schedule there for next weekend. But kudos to Daniels, kudos to Quinn, kudos to their stick-to-itiveness. And not only that, but also being aggressive. Now, is that going to come back to bite them down the road? It could, as we saw last year, Dan Campbell making it into the postseason, and what happened there in San Francisco. Will it be a repeat performance by Quinn, maybe being uber, just going by the analytics, or even throwing out the playbook to say, we're going to do this, we're going to try to win, which is a good philosophy to have, and it just does show the rest of the team that our coach is going to lead us to as far as we possibly can. But as you all know, if you're going to live by that sword, you could end up dying by it, based on what we saw last year with the aforementioned Campbell there with the Lions in the NFC Championship game. So that was, again, the game of the weekend. Who knows what's going to happen tonight between the Vikings and Rams? I talked about that on Thursday's podcast, so if you want to go back and hear my analysis, assessment of that, and who I predict as the winner, please feel free to do so. But the other games, and I'm going to save the Steelers for last. Everybody knows I'm a huge Steeler fan. But I'm going to go in order, minus the Ravens-Steeler game Saturday night, when it comes to the games here. And I'll start off with the game Saturday afternoon. And I had this wrong, because I thought that with the way the Chargers went into the postseason, and not that they went in like Lions by any stretch, but they did win the last 2 games. They ended up getting a 5 seed to have to go to Houston as opposed to going to Baltimore based on the Steelers losing their final game against the Bengals there last Saturday night. But the Chargers, pretty much where it all unfolded, they had a 6-0 lead. They had opportunities early when it comes to not only kicking the field goal, but then they had the scenario early on where they were unable to convert 6 because when the Texans on their first offensive play had a turnover, and then for the Chargers, if they would have been able to punch that in to make it 10-0, who knows how that game would have turned out. As it was only 6-0, so they were unable to get that score to have the Texans maybe on their heels a little bit. But as it was, late in the first half, not only were they able to get a touchdown, but also they got a long drive of 99 yards to punctuate a touchdown to make it 10-6 to go into the half. And then in the second half, it just all unraveled for the Chargers. Turnovers left and right. Justin Herbert with 4 interceptions in the game. And I don't want to hear about Herbert now. Is he a top-flight talent at the quarterback position? Absolutely. Does he have a bright future? Certainly, and he does need some weapons on the outside. That I have to give you, because it can't be all Lad McConkey. So you can't have him be the one guy that's going to carry the load there as far as the wide receiver position is concerned. So I understand they need some help. But Herbert showed you here that, is he ready for prime time? Is he ready for the big spotlight? And what you saw there, he melted. Now you have to give the Texan defense some credit, and hopefully that Texan defense will carry themselves into Kansas City and put up a performance. And mind you, that game was close there the Saturday before Christmas when Houston went to Kansas City and lost there 24-19. But we'll talk about that later. But their defense did rise to the occasion, turn the ball over, or turn the Chargers over there. Joe Mixon, 106 yards on the ground, punctuated by the game-ending touchdown there late. And pretty much the second half was all dominated by Houston. And we could say that the Chargers were in the game, and yes, you can say that, but when you get a pick 6 there on top of the capper there by Joe Mixon, there's nothing really much else to discuss other than the Texans win another home game in the wild card round, and now they're going to do something that they haven't done before. Not only beat Kansas City in the divisional round, which they didn't do so years ago under Deshaun Watson, and now they have another opportunity to do so this coming Saturday, and they have never been to an AFC Championship game, but the Texans, they win their playoff game at home, which is usually the case, and now let's see if they can build off of that as they go to play the 2-time defending Super Bowl champs. And all I can say is this: the Chargers, good year, but the balloon was, or the air out of the balloon was let out big time. And very disappointing to say the least. I picked them to win this game. I thought that they were going to be the one road team that won over the weekend, even the Vikings included. I did pick them as well. But as it is, we all know Washington is the only team out of the 5 games that we've seen that has been a road team that has conquered on enemy turf. So let's see what the Chargers will build from this. You would think with Jim Harbaugh, and they'll try to get some more weapons for Justin Herbert. And as it is, Khalil Mack, he could call it a career as he's mulling retirement, and that would be a huge loss. But we all know he's had a long career in the NFL, mainly with the Raiders and the Chicago Bears. So unless they ask him to come back for one more year to see maybe he could get another run, and maybe with some more weapons for Herbert that they could take a shot at not only the AFC West, but maybe the AFC overall. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But the Texans, they move on. Now, I'm not sold based on this performance there yesterday, because the Chargers, good team, solid team, but let me see them do well in Arrowhead, and I'll talk more about that matchup and my overall feelings about the Texans and, of course, the Chiefs there on Thursday's podcast. And then yesterday, Denver, who knew if they were going to be a team with their defense that was going to travel to Orchard Park, that maybe they could be in the game for a half, maybe a quarter or 2.5 quarters, who knows? And as it was, that was the case. Because with their opening drive, they got the touchdown there, that big pass from Bo Nix to Troy Franklin, and you thought, oh, wow, they're trying to make a statement here. And they did so on that opening drive, but from that point on, they did nothing. That was their only score of the day. They only had, 170-some-odd yards total offense throughout the course of the game. and they were unable to get first downs, as you saw. And even though it was 13-7 midway through the third quarter, but I did not have a lot of belief that the Bronco offense was just going to all of a sudden wake up and take the lead. And this is, mind you, in the second quarter at 10-7, they had the fake punt there, which the ball, I think, just landed into the arms of, I believe it was, what was it, Mims that caught the ball there on that fake punt. And even then, they did nothing with that. So, and they also missed a field goal there in the game as well. They actually hit the upright right before the half, which would have made it 10-10. And for the Broncos, they were unable to muster up anything offensively. And even though it was 13-7 and you thought to yourself, all right, well, if they could get the ball back and maybe muster up something, maybe even cut it to 3 and at least keep the Bills at bay to where they could have a decent drive and not go 3 and out and maybe get themselves some rhythm going as far as Bo Nix and that offense is concerned. But as it was, that was not to be the case. And at 13-7, you had that huge play. It was, what, 4th and 2, I believe? And you had Josh Allen trying to find somebody open. And what did he do? He got Ty Johnson in the back of the end zone with this acrobatic catch where it almost looked like his feet and his legs were out of bounds, but he was able to corral the pass, inbounds, touchdown. And that went from 13-7 to 20-7, and that's your ball game. Because after that, well, actually, they went to 21-7 because they went for 2 there. So my apologies. So for the Bills, that was the play of the game. And at that point, you knew that the Broncos weren't going to be a threat to the Bills the rest of the afternoon. But you have to give it up for what Denver did this first year. They got off to a slow start, and they staggered down the stretch with a couple of losses there, including that one in Cincinnati. But they blew out the Chiefs, even though the Chiefs didn't show up. And even though for 2.5 quarters, they played well and looked like they may have had a shot, but you had no belief that the Bronco offense was going to click at any point, especially after that opening drive. And it was just a matter of time before the Bills were going to take over, as they did, to a 31-7 victory, which sets themselves up for a great game there on CBS 6:30 there on Sunday, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you had the Green Bay-Philadelphia game, which to me had no flow to it. I understand late it started to get a little bit interesting, but you talk about a game that was just a lot of punts, and the opening kickoff was fumbled to where 3 plays later, Jalen Hurts back in the end zone to get the touchdown there to get things started, but their offense was not in sync after that first quarter. In fact, Jalen Hurts, he completed the pass in the fourth quarter early on, where it was his first completion since the first quarter. And it was a situation where the game was almost like being played in the mud, although the conditions were perfect, but it was just a game that he couldn't really get a flow. It was just a lot of punts in the first half, and then you had Jordan Love, who, he has talent, and I like him as a quarterback, but he's a guy that he's going to have to really show me, starting next year, that he can play with the big boys, because for whatever the reason, he kind of reminds me of Robinson Cano, if you want to go in baseball mode, people, that has the talent, but for whatever the reason, he's just kind of, I don't want to say laissez-faire, or just maybe he's taking his talent for granted. I don't know, but for whatever the reason, Jordan Love, although his talent is there, but he doesn't really get into the guts of the game. He doesn't really show you that intestinal or even testicular fortitude that you like, especially against the big games and the big teams. And when you look at what they've done this year, you have to take the Bear game out as the last game of the year, and just to extract that, they had lost 7 games this year, 6 of them against the Eagles twice, the Lions twice, and the Vikings twice. So how can you take him or this team seriously if they can't step up against the big boys? So I just need to put that out there. And I like Jordan Love. I'm not knocking him and thinking, oh, he's a bad player, this and that. He has ability, and the guy's shown that he can win. But when the chips are on the line, as you saw in San Francisco last year, and maybe you could say, well, what about the opening game against Dallas in the wild card? Maybe that was more of an indictment on the Cowboys than it was on Green Bay going in there and dominating that game. But the Packers and Jordan Love, they had a chance to win that game in San Francisco last year. And in that fourth quarter, he was, 5 for 9 for 36 yards, and he threw 2 interceptions. And then yesterday, didn't show you anything in the game, threw 3 picks overall, and even though at 16-3, when the Eagles took charge after that 10-0 lead, and then you had Brandon McManus. He missed that field goal there early, but they cut the deficit 10-3, and then the Eagles got that touchdown. And even though they missed extra point, which you thought was going to come back to haunt them, because even though the Packers came back to tie the game, came back to make it 16-10 and cut the deficit, but they didn't do anything after that. And for a Packer fan, I'm sure you got to be excited about your quarterback. I'm sure you have to look and say, well, hey, he still has a bright future ahead of him. He's still young. He's still learning, etc. All right, fine. But now he's going to have to step it up big time, because for him sitting on the bench a couple of years under Aaron Rodgers, and now that ship has sailed 2 years into his Packer career as a starter, all right, he has shown you glimpses. He has shown you promise, and he has shown that he can win games in this league, but he hasn't been able to win the big game. And he hasn't been able to even compete in these big games, because in these matchups, it seems like the spotlight or the stage is a little bit too bright for him. And all right, you got to give it up to the Eagle defense. We know they're top ranked, etc., so on and so forth. And even with A.J. Brown sitting on the sidelines reading a book, that just goes to show you how the game was. And Brown had one catch for 10 yards in the game, and it just goes to show how stagnant the Philly offense, and I get it, Jalen Hurts is coming back from a concussion, and I know Saquon had over 100 yards, but it was a game that was just kind of, And yes, it did get a little bit interesting, but did you really think that the Packers were going to threaten even down 16-10? Because you knew that they had to get the ball back at 16-10 to make it interesting in order for the NFL fan, whether it's you, me, etc., to say, all right, let's see what Jordan Love's going to do. He's down by a score. He has the ball. As it was, they kicked the field goal to make it 19-10. They tacked on another field goal, and I know for the people who bet, Saquon was off to the races with slid where he could have had a touchdown, and that obviously did not happen. But that was another game that was just left you with your mouth dry and just wanting more. And now let's get to the Saturday night game, because I knew that the Steelers were going into this game on a 4-game losing streak. In the process of that 4-game losing streak, they lost in Baltimore. And all you need to know was the first half. I've watched Steeler football dating back to the mid-'70s, and I've watched just about every game, and obviously every playoff game since 1992, the first year of Bill Cowher, when he was the coach of the team. And there are a couple of instances where I could say, wow, they've had terrible halves of football. And I can break it down. I don't want to bore you with that. I don't want to get into just how pathetic that they have played, whether regular season or postseason. But what I witnessed there Saturday night in that first half, they were down 21-0. They were outgained 308-60. That was as bad of a half as I've ever witnessed as a Steeler fan. And I don't want to hear that they scored a touchdown to make it 21-7, and then they got another TD to make it 28-14. And even though that Kirk Herbstreit was trying to say, the Steelers could get in this game. Nonsense. They were not in this game whatsoever. So I don't even want to hear that the Steelers, although they finally woke up in the second half a little bit, but they were still a far cry from even competing in this game, let alone even getting close to this game. Because from what I saw there, it's time to cut bait with Russell Wilson. No offense, I like him, but he is not the answer. If they bring him back, Omar Khan and the Roonies, they need to get their head examined, because as you saw there, he was just under siege at times, and he was unable to avoid the rush as he got sacked. And then Justin Fields, is he going to be the guy? And now I know I'm prognosticating here in this offseason, but the Steelers have a huge offseason with a ton of free agents that they have to sign, and I could go through the list. Maybe I'll save it for after the year, but please, if you want to bring back Russell Wilson, not on my watch. Or Justin Fields, or Landon Roberts, or go on down the list. And not only that, but the defense was just putrid, and we've seen that over the last 5 weeks. Minka Fitzpatrick, can we get the witness protection program? Because he is a shell of, not Pro Bowl, of an all-pro first-team selection that he was 2, 3, 4 years ago. The guy has been lost, and I don't know if he's just checked out. I don't know if he feels as if he's tired of what's gone on. And as it is, a lot of people are thinking about the message Mike Tomlin is sending, which was not the case for Cam Hayward. He said, the message is still clear. Nobody's phasing out Mike Tomlin, and of course I'm going to get to him. But if you're the defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin, and if you're the front office, you have to think long and hard to think that maybe he's not the guy. I don't know what has gone on with this defense. They had a ton of turnovers in the first 13 games of the season, and then the last 4 and even 5, if you want to say the playoffs, you can forget about it. They have not been able to be as larcenous and as opportunistic as they once were over that first stretch where they were 10-3. And think about this also, on top of all that, when we take a look at the defense, TJ Watt was invisible in this game, and understand he went at Derrick Henry a lot, where Lamar Jackson, they ran the ball down their throats. And it was just an eyesore to watch if you're a Steeler fan, and no surprise, because yes, the final score and the outcome, absolutely not. But the way that the Steeler defense played and their offense was in clogged toilet mode, as it has been over the last 5 weeks, and this is the result you're going to get. And mind you, there were no turnovers. There were a couple of fumbles that they didn't recover, but there were no turnovers in the game. And like I said on Thursday, if they played a clean game, they'll probably still lose the game. And as it was, it turned out to be a blowout, despite the fact that the final score showed 28-14. And what more can you say? A Steeler team that was out to sea pretty much from the start. And let me get to the coach now. I understand that this has been a big theme here over the last couple of days, the whole fire Tomlin, and even from some of the Pittsburgh pundits to say, hey, maybe it's time, so on and so forth. And listen, I've thought about this long and hard prior to the game on Saturday night and even afterwards. And all I'll say is this, and I mentioned this on my live stream there Saturday night that I have on YouTube. If you want to go back and check it out, please feel free to do so. Now, I'll talk about the front office, and then I'll talk about what my thoughts are. If a lot of the rumors dating back to last week, Adam Schefter bringing up that teams may inquire about Mike Tomlin as far as trading a draft pick for his services. And if that's the case, the front office has to listen. Now, I don't know which teams are involved. I don't know. Again, this could all be scuttlebutt. I get it. But I would think the Rooneys would have to look at this. Let's say if it's a team that's maybe drafting in the top 10. Now, I have to go through the teams. I have to go through the list of teams that don't have any coaches. Maybe New Orleans. Let's just throw them as an example. And I don't know where they're going to be drafted, or maybe even the Jets. I think the Jets are drafting 7th or 8th. They would have to really consider that, because now there aren't any big-time quarterbacks coming out, we all know. But if they're going to look to upgrade this team, and I understand Tomlin's been there 18 years, but just because he's been there 18 years, and yes, it's a badge of honor, and we know the organization, 3 coaches in 55 years, but maybe it's time to move on. And if there is a situation where a team that has a high draft pick is willing to part with that draft pick and maybe a second-round pick as well, if not this year, next year, they would have to really consider that. Don't you think? Now, as far as me personally, I've always said, if you're going to let Mike Tomlin go, who are you going to replace him with? And I don't want to hear, oh, you're going to replace him with Ben Johnson or whatever. First off, why would Ben Johnson go to Pittsburgh when the quarterback situation is unstable at the present moment? Yes, he has some players to work with, but Najee Harris is another guy. He's a free agent after now, not even after this year. The year's over, so he's a free agent forthcoming. Who knows if the Steelers are going to re-sign him? And Dan Moore, a guard, another guy that they're going to have to re-up on, quite possibly. Why would he want to come back to this team where there's a lot of uncertainty with the offensive side of the ball? And we know that Ben Johnson, the coordinator of the Lions, is an offensive-minded guy. Why would he come here? Why would any coach come here, even though it is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 6-time Super Bowl winners, the cornerstone franchise, or one of the cornerstone franchises in the league? But who knows? Why would anybody want to come here? Just because, oh, I'm the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers? When you don't even know who the quarterback is or who's going to be the running back. Jaylen Warren can't be your every down back. You keep him, and he's a good counter to your head guy or lead guy as far as running back goes. But that's the thing. Who's the coach that you're going to bring in here? And I don't want to hear, oh, you got Pete Carroll. Oh, yeah, come on, Ben Johnson or some other hot assistant that's out there. Do you want to bring Brian Flores back in here, which I guess you could maybe say is a Mike Tomlin 2.0, quite possibly. But still, that's just going from one extreme to another. So I couldn't even give you the guy, but I will say this. Am I more willing to part with Tomlin now than ever before? I'd have to say yes, because 18 years in one job is a long time. And maybe, not to say it's time for a new voice, but maybe it's just time for another coach to come in there to lead this team to a playoff victory, which I haven't seen in 8 years. And Tomlin, let's face it, I get it that the teams haven't been great here in this latest iteration of this Steelers team. When you look at 2021 as a 7th seed, when you look at last year as a 7th seed, and you look at this year as a 6th seed, which in essence they should have been a 3 seed, or I'll say could have been, because they had a 2-game lead at 10-3, and they just spit the bit down the stretch. Granted, it was against Philly, KC, Baltimore, and even Cincinnati, who was fighting for their playoff lives. So I understand it was a brutal schedule. But how I look at it is that regular season success is not translated into the postseason. And maybe it's time for a change. Now, I love Tomlin. Again, who are you going to bring in? I couldn't even pick a guy. And the reason why I couldn't pick a guy is because what is the roster going to look like? So with that being said, I don't know who I would take, but again, I'm more open for Tomlin's dismissal than ever. And lastly about that, here's the thing. You can't fire Tomlin just yet because he still has 2 more years left on his deal. The Steelers are not going to just say bye-bye and send them off when they still have to pay him for another 2 years. Now, if there is a trade possibility to where that team is going to take on the final 2 years of that contract, that's a totally different story. But as of right now, he's not going anywhere, people. So you guys just going to have to grin and bear it. And that's your Steelers situation there for 2024 into 2025. And I know, there's another thing too, as I didn't pick this up on the notes that I jotted down, going back to the Green Bay Philly thing. I get it that they didn't have Christian Watson and they lost 2 wide receivers in the game, including Romeo Doubs to a concussion. But still, you got to do a little bit better and a little bit more if you're Jordan Love there with the Packers in a playoff game. Couple of other notes. Oh, let me get to the schedule here real quick, then I got to get to college football and other things too. As far as the forthcoming schedule, it's pretty much set. It's already set. I say pretty much because we still have the game tonight, as we know. Divisional playoff round, 4:30 Saturday, Houston at Kansas City, followed by the winner of the Viking-Ram game playing in the Philadelphia. Oh, wait, I got that wrong. My apologies, because I'm looking at 2 different things here. Washington, Detroit, Saturday night, 8 o'clock, because Minnesota and the Rams, they're not going to play Saturday. They're going to need that extra day. So the winner of that game will go to Philly, 3 o'clock at the Lincoln Financial Field. And then the capper of them all, Baltimore, Buffalo, which right now by far is the best game of the weekend. And usually divisional playoff weekend is the weekend everybody looks forward to. But even if the Vikings win or the Rams win, I get it. We could certainly dissect it and say, all right, this could be a very intriguing game. This could be fast, whatever. We could pick these storylines, etc., until we're blue in the face. But none of these games jump at you except for Baltimore and Buffalo. That's it. Case closed. Houston, Kansas City, I've seen that movie before, and chances are it's going to end the same way. Can Jayden Daniels go into Detroit and really put off a major upset against a team that everybody has picked to go and even win a Super Bowl, including yours truly? And then Minnesota, Rams, Philadelphia, okay. And Baltimore, Buffalo, it's a matchup of the MVP and to see who's going to win this game to advance. And you could even argue that that game, Sunday, 6:30 at Orchard Park, could be the representative for the AFC in the Super Bowl when it's all said and done. Now, as far as news off the field, no shock. Mike Vrabel's your new coach of the New England Patriots, and you just knew that that was going to happen once the axe was grinding for a one Gerard Mayo, and knowing that Mike Vrabel was going to pay a visit to the Jets, you knew that Robert Kraft had to do something, and he had his man set. So Vrabel's your new head coach there of the Patriots. And then Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles again during a workout. So now you have to really wonder what the Cleveland Browns are going to do. I believe that the second pick overall in this upcoming draft, and granted, there's not a slew of quarterbacks coming out. We all know about Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Who knows if they're going to trade down? But we all know that with 2 more years left on his deal, and he's making $46 million in each of the next 2 years, fully guaranteed. And I believe if they try to cut him, there'll be a $64 million cap hit to the Browns, at least this forthcoming year, if they do decide to cut him. But man, now you're going to have Deshaun Watson. He's going to be out for this upcoming year. The Brown organization is just a flat-out mess. And I guess you needed a quarterback. I understand that. But you talk about karma with all of the off-the-field stuff that had transpired with Deshaun Watson in his days in Houston, and then you're Jimmy Haslam, one of the worst owners in the sport, when you trade for this quarterback, who we understand had talent and has had success in the league, but you knew that the football gods were looking down on him and Cleveland and that whole franchise, as we know, ever since they left in 95 to go to Baltimore and won 2 Super Bowls in the process, and then to come back in 99 and to go through a slew of quarterbacks from Tim Couch to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and in between to have Deshaun Watson, guaranteed money, 5 years, $230 million, with all the accusations and the cloud hovering over him. And what happens? An 11-game suspension to start off his Cleveland Brown career, and then gets injured last year with his throwing shoulder after that big-time performance in Baltimore when they were down by 2 scores, and they still made the playoffs without him, only to get bombarded by the Texan defense in 2 pick sixes against Joe Flacco. And now, here where the dust settles, a year gone lost, 4-13. Watson blows his Achilles in the middle of the year, blows it while he's trying to rehab it, and now a scenario where they have to pretty much start all over. And if you're a Cleveland Brown fan, I can't say I feel for you because I can't stand you, considering I'm a Steeler fan, but I will say I'm sorry for you guys. And that is my NFL rant for right this very moment. Now, I got to stick with football because I got some college football games to cover as we turn our attention to the collegiate Final Four, semifinal, and you had 2 games that were pretty good. No classics by any stretch, but they were, I would say the Penn State Notre Dame game was very good. Ohio State and Texas looked like it was going to have a crescendo, but it certainly bottomed out there at the end. But I'll start off with Notre Dame and Penn State. This was a game that we knew that the defense was going to be prominent. Who knows which running game was going to be that much more better to go up against these defenses. And for the Fighting Irish, they certainly fought hard, and their quarterback with some key errors there late as they had to go around an interception where at 17-10, Penn State came back to tie the game. And then after the interception there, early 4th, to where the Nittany Lions were able to capitalize to get a touchdown there, 24-17, and you thought to yourself, oh, this could be the big turnaround. I don't know if Riley Leonard is going to take him down the field. He already had thrown 2 interceptions in the game, including that costly one there for the Nittany Lions to take the lead in the 4th quarter. But as it was, they had a huge break as the corner fell down where the tight end, Jayden Guesthouse, was his name? Greathouse. I say Guesthouse because I'm thinking of a compound word in that regard. Jayden Greathouse with the 54-yard touchdown, and that was a shocker because I didn't think Notre Dame was going to have it in them to come back to tie the game. And based on that mishap there by the corner who fell, they were able to get the long touchdown, tie the game, and then now what it boils down to is this. Now, I don't know what was said on the sideline, and I didn't watch any of the post game, but with 30-something seconds left, and the game tied at 24, I'm sure James Franklin told his quarterback, Drew Aller, to not make the big mistake, to not try to play hero ball, that it's okay to play for overtime. And what happened? He felt the rush. He made an errant throw. It was picked off there at, the Nittany line. It was in the 40s because they were able to convert a big third down there to get a first down and set them up in field goal range. But that was just a terrible throw by Drew Aller. Back foot. Felt the rush. He should have just taken a sack there, and that's the one time that it would have been okay to take a sack because at least they would have played for overtime and had an opportunity to win the game at that point. But for him to throw that interception at that juncture of the game was inexcusable. And yes, I understand he wants to make a play there. He doesn't want to take a sack. But again, that's where coaching comes in, and that's where James Franklin, I'm not going to put it all on him, but I'm sure he had to get into his quarterback's ear to say, son, there's no need to be a hero here. If you feel the rush, and unless there's somebody wide open or you have a throw where you certainly have someone that you could get the ball to, then do it. But if you're just going to throw it just to avoid the rush, don't do it. Just take the sack and we'll run out the clock and therefore play into overtime. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case, as they got a big first down there because when the ball was intercepted, it was out of field goal range for Mitch Jeter. And then sure enough, once they got that first down and were able to set themselves up for a game-winning field goal, they did so. And Notre Dame advances. And if you're Penn State, that was a bitter pill to swallow, considering you got second life there with that interception to take the lead. Granted, you had a tough break there with the corner, as I mentioned. And then that pass by Aller just literally put the Penn State Nittany Lions season up in smoke. And that's one that's going to stick with them for the rest of the spring rest of this winter into spring practice and obviously into the start of next season. Is it something to build on? Yes, but to me, Penn State, although they got to a semifinal, and yes, they had a big regular season, but they didn't really beat anybody that was of ilk, or at least a team that was better than them. And Notre Dame and Penn State, they're about equal. At least Notre Dame beat Georgia. And people could argue Georgia, well, they didn't have Carson Beck, and they weren't the Georgia team that won 2 national titles there a couple of years back. I understand, but they are still Georgia. And for Penn State, that is just a bitter loss, no matter how you slice it. And Notre Dame, they go on to their first national championship since 2012 when Eddie Lacy and Alabama ran roughshod over them in the Orange Bowl back, 13 years ago. So let's see what's going to happen with Notre Dame. I know to my friend, John Irving, who's a huge Notre Dame fan, the biggest one that I know, I'm sure he was dancing in his living room there a few nights ago. And then as far as the Ohio State-Texas game, it was more of a defensive battle than we would have thought. And based on what we saw there at the Rose Bowl, I thought Ohio State would have a bigger or better showing offensively, but give it up for Texas. They played very well defensively, and even though they kept the Buckeye offense at bay for the most part of the game, but once the Buckeyes got on the board 7-0, Texas wasn't able to muster up anything until late in the first half where Jaden Blue got the touchdown there in the final minute, and you thought to yourself, all right, now getting that touchdown, maybe they'll have momentum going into the second half. But as it was on that screen to Travion Henderson as he goes 75 yards for the touchdown, oh my goodness, I'm sure all the Longhorn fans had long faces thinking like, oh, what happened? We weren't able to muster up any offense. We couldn't do anything against this Buckeye defense. And then when we score, what happens? We let a cavalry go down the field to where Travion Henderson wasn't even touched. And now they take the lead 14-7. All right, so you got to live with that. The Longhorns then finally get a touchdown there, fourth quarter, as it was back and forth. And now you have a scenario where let's see what the Buckeyes are going to answer. And sure enough, they did, as they got the go-ahead score there midway through the fourth quarter. And as a matter of fact, that was third into the fourth quarter when Texas had that drive. So then the Buckeyes answer back. They take the lead 21-14. And then now as the Longhorns are going down the field and Quinn Ewers trying to make plays, and you had a scenario where even earlier on during that touchdown drive where Arch Manning came in and got that conversion to where a lot of people thought it was a fumble, but that was not. He was already down on contact. But for that fourth quarter, that final drive where the Longhorns were looking to punch it into the end zone, a little bit more than 2 minutes to go, and what happens? Gets sacked by Jack Sawyer. Sawyer, which was his college roommate before he transferred to Ohio State. And for Sawyer to get the strip sack, the scoop, and the touchdown going the other way to make it 28-14, that was your game. And I'm sure that had to be bittersweet for Ewers and even for Sawyer for that matter to know that he had to go in on his former roommate to not only sack him, recover the fumble, and go, 80-some-odd yards for the touchdown. And I'll get the exact touchdown here for you guys and gals. But that was a game where it was tooth and nail, battle to the end. I was hoping that the Longhorns would have punched it in for the touchdown because it would have made for fascinating theater and certainly would have been a little bit better of a game than I thought with Penn State and Notre Dame, although the finish was interesting, and that was based on the interception, of course, by Aller. But for Texas, as they were looking to knock on the door and barge through to tie the game, and for them to not be able to capitalize there, and with the irony of that Jack Sawyer dynamic with Quinn Ewers, that was one where you have to, no matter how you slice it, that's one that is going to be talked about, especially if Ohio State wins the whole thing, because now they're going to have to seal the deal against Notre Dame, which will be a week from tonight. So it's not even I'm going to preview the game come Thursday's podcast or even talk about it. I'm going to have to discuss it a week from today. Now, I understand you can't play the game Thursday because you had the scenario of both games, the semifinals Thursday and Friday. It would have been better if it was Friday night because it would lead into the divisional playoff. And I understand it's Saturday. It's a thing where it's going to get forgotten by the time you get to Monday. But once you get to Monday's national championship game, you're going to be so wrapped up in what took place over the divisional weekend, and especially with Bills, Ravens, and all the hoopla and the attention that game's going to get, where we would think it's going to be a classic. But for the championship game to be played next Monday, it's almost going to be an afterthought. I hate to say it that way, but it's true. And it was an 83-yard fumble return for Sawyer. So we still have plenty of time to talk about it. I'm not going to bring it up until we get to next Monday, and that is it. So your national championship is set. Notre Dame, Ohio State, I talked about this on Thursday. I'm sure this is the matchup that they wanted. I think they'd rather have Oregon there, maybe against Notre Dame because they were number one, but you still have Ohio State, you still have Notre Dame. Those are two big-time schools, blue blood schools, if you will. And one more time, and a 7 versus 8 on top of that. So it's not a 1 versus 4 or a 1 versus 2. This is a 7 seed versus an 8 when your national championship game will commence. And the 7 seed, of course, being Notre Dame, and the 8 seed being Ohio State. And some sad news there in college football where you had Bill McCartney, the head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes, dating back to the 90s, their only national championship that they had in 90, died over the weekend, had dementia. So unfortunately, his death, not that it was disclosed as far as what was it, but of course dementia being a big part of that. And unfortunately, we know how dementia, what that's going to do to anyone, let alone Bill McCartney. So thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the former coach, died at the age of 84. So some very sad news on that front. All right, now let me turn my attention as I have 4 sports to get through. I'm going to kind of zoom through it because as we all know, the fall and winter sports, there are some things that we could touch on, but it's not as if you have a lot to unpack or a lot to really wrap your arms around. So I'll start off with the association as I lace up my high tops and get into that. The Cleveland Cavaliers, we know about their big winning streak and beating the OK City Thunder there on Wednesday night and extended their streak into the weekend, but they lost to the Pacers as they have a home and home, and they lost in Cleveland. Now the back-to-back will be played, I think, tomorrow in Indiana, but the Pacers, and they played well here. They've actually, believe, are on a winning streak in their own right. I believe they've also won as many as 6 in a row. Let me pull that up. Yes, they have won 6 in a row and are currently 5th in the conference. So Indiana, we all know they have a good core of players, the Tyrese Halliburtons, the Pascal Siakams, and some good role players, the Andrew Nemhards of the world, Miles Turner. We know their roster. So now Indiana seems to be getting in sync at the right time as a lot of these teams are approaching the midway point of the season. And you're still a couple of games away. Celtics have played 39 games, so they're obviously a couple away from the halfway point. I don't think you have one team that has reached the halfway point just yet. Let me see. No, nobody has reached the halfway point. Once you get to next week, you'll have a lot of teams either at 41 or they'll surpass that. By the time you get to Thursday's pod, not the case. But for Indiana, they snapped that streak, so let's see if that puts maybe Cleveland in a little bit of a tailspin. We'll have to wait and see on that. And then you also have a situation where if you're a Pelican fan, I know you have to be wondering what's between the ears of a one Zion Williamson. He missed a flight the other day going to Philadelphia. And not only that, this has not only been the one instance where Zion has been, I'll say caught for lack of a better word. But when you have a scenario where he missed the flight, that it was on the tarmac and you had to wait for him to arrive, he got suspended for the game in Philadelphia there on Friday night before heading to Boston on Sunday or yesterday as the Celtics were able to thwart the Pelicans there and they won 120 to 119. But for Zion, as we all know the injury history, finally coming back from that and then he misses a team flight. I mean, Zion, what is going on here? He has to get his head on straight. And last night he only had 16 points. So it's not as if he lit the world on fire. We know the game last week he had 22 points in 28 minutes. But Zion, let's wake up, my G. You're in the league. You're healthy. You can't be missing flights. And yes, based on some of the reports or what it is that I read, this isn't an isolated incident. There's been several occasions that led up to this. So has he been late to team meetings? Has he been late to practices? Obviously, he missed a team flight. And I get it. He got his money dating back to last year, his extension, and taking his time to come back. And I get it. He's hurt. He's going to take his time and be medically cleared. But here's a guy that has all the talent in the world. We know that he's a freak when it comes to his ability, and I get it, he's a big man, and he's had some issues with weight, as we know, trying to stay in shape, and he's had these nursing foot injuries and hamstring injuries, etc. And I don't want to pile on Zion, but if you're supposed to be the guy, the face of the franchise, and if you're hurt, you're hurt. I understand. But now you get caught with missing a team flight and getting suspended. You got to do better than that, my guy. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. Zion Williamson, if you haven't gotten yourself on track after what happened there on Friday, then when is it going to start? You're taking your career and your status as a former number 1 overall pick for granted here. And yes, I'm not in those locker rooms. I'm not on those flights. I'm not a part of the team. I understand that. But if we're going to witness and read or hear from afar that this is what's going on, come on, man. You're putting yourself out there to be critiqued. And here is me, yours truly, as a podcast host, is going to critique you. We want you to do good. We want you to succeed. We know the ability and the talent that you have. But when you pull something like this, you got to get called out for it. So that's what you got with Zion. And then I know some history made in the NBA where for the second time this year, you had Nikola Jokic and Russell Westbrook, for what this is, twice. 2 guys on the same team have triple doubles in the same game. And that's a very remarkable achievement when you ask me. But that's the big news of the NBA here over the last week. So with the standings, we talked about Indiana and how they've done here over this recent stretch. Bucks get blown up by the Knicks at the Garden last night. And yes, you got to wonder, are the Milwaukee Bucks the Green Bay Packers of the NBA? Because it was even brought up yesterday. Their competition, especially against the East, they've lost to the Cavaliers twice, they lost to the Celtics 3 times, and now they get blown out by the Knicks twice. So they're 0-7 against the top 3 teams in the East. And now they lose to Indiana. They're not a top 3 team. But you have to wonder, just like Green Bay, they can't beat Minnesota, they can't beat Philadelphia, they can't beat the Lions. Now the Bucks, who have turned their season around. Remember, they got off to that brutal start. And yes, they've been respectable. All right, NBA Cup if you want to celebrate that. But for this team to not be able to beat any of the top 3 teams, and here we are in the middle of January, and they're done with the Celtics for the year, that says a lot. And now 0-2 against the Knicks, and now in a scenario where they're 0-7 against those top 3 teams, certainly going to have to regroup to see what's gone wrong here as far as them competing against the beasts of the East, if you want to call it that. And then out west, status quo, Oklahoma City has won 2 games since they lost that game in Cleveland. And everything else, status quo, nothing else I could say. I know the Kings, how about that? They fired Mike Brown, and since then they haven't lost. 7 in a row, 20-19. Could I still get my over here? As we approach, what is their over? 46.5. Yeah, they still got a lot of work to do. And they dug themselves a deep hole, so kudos to Doug Christie and what they've done here. And the Suns have now crept back 1-3 in a row as they have the 10th seed, knocking Golden State out of that. And the Warriors, ugh. And did I pick them as an under this year? I forgot. I did not. My unders are Philly, Miami, and Toronto. Philly, I'm going to get that, barring just a big-time miracle. Memphis is looking good, and Houston's looking good. I picked them both as overs. And Miami, right now, they played a little bit better, putting the Jimmy Butler fiasco aside. So, yeah, I'll talk about my over-unders a little bit later on as we get through the NBA. And other than that, that's what you have there. Now let me lace up the skates and take a trip around the ice. Again, not much to really dissect here. I know Alexander Ovechkin, you know I'm going to be on this Ovi Wayne Gretzky goal watch. Another empty netter. I get it. It's an empty net goal, but they count. When you pull the goalie, and I get it, you're going to get cheap goals if you're the coach there, Spencer Carberry, to try to get Ovechkin out there to see if he could get those mop-up easy goals. And listen, don't hate the player, hate the game. That's how it is sometimes, as he's gotten plenty of these empty net goals here throughout this stretch, even with the broken leg that he suffered in the middle of November. But now he's at 873. He is 21 from tying and 22 from breaking Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal-scoring record. So you know I'm going to be on top of that and have been on top of that as you've listened here throughout the last several weeks here on the podcast. And then give it up to the Bruins. They snapped a 6-game losing streak, certainly in a quagmire there as they fired their head coach Jim Montgomery. They bring in Joe Sacco. Yeah, they seem to be playing better, but then they lost 6 in a row. And in a matinee down in South Florida, where they had a 3-2 lead late in the game, they had a chance to get an empty netter as they shot it halfway down the ice. It hit the left goalpost to where Sam Reinhart gets the game-tying goal. And when you thought, oh, all right, they may get a point out of this, but watch them get either an overtime loss or a shootout loss, which they will still get a point, but still not a win under their belt. And then sure enough, David Pastrnak in overtime gets the goal to snap that streak. So for the Bruin fan, at least they can rejoice there for a game, knowing that they could snap that streak, maybe start a new one, as the Bruins have been floundering there in the Atlantic Division. And I have to go back to the NBA in a second, and I'll compound that with the NHL in a moment when it comes to the schedules, because I did forget that, so my apologies there. But between Ovechkin and the Bruins, I got nothing else to really get into, as a lot of the teams have already gone past the halfway point. Some teams have played 44, 45 games on the schedule, and you have some that are at 41, but as I look through, the Kings have only played 40, so they're the one team that have not reached the halfway point of their season. But as I take a look at the standings, Leafs, Panthers, top 2 teams in the Atlantic, followed by Tampa and Boston there. Capitals, 5 points over the Devils, and then you have Winnipeg, 3 points over the Jets. And Carolina's 1 point behind the Devils in the Metropolitan Division. Wild, as I mentioned, 3 points behind Winnipeg. And then you have the Stars 3 points behind the Wild in the Western Conference, but in the Central Division. And in the Pacific, Vegas, 6 points ahead of Edmonton, who are 2 points ahead of the LA Kings. And as far as the schedules go for the upcoming week in the NHL, as I pull that up here, tonight, Florida at Philly, LA at Edmonton. So, all right, you got a game there where Edmonton trying to catch up to the Kings, trying to catch up to the Oilers there in the Pacific. Tampa at Boston tomorrow. Dallas at Toronto. Nothing else there. Florida, New Jersey. That's all you have there. Rangers in Colorado, big whoop. Then Edmonton and Minnesota, as you have a double dip on TNT, starting at 6 o'clock, Carolina at Buffalo, Edmonton, Minnesota. That is your NHL. As far as your NBA schedule here in the early part of the week tonight, Memphis at Houston. There you go. You're 2 versus 3 down in H-Town, all right. Wemby playing in LA, and I believe this is the first games in LA since the fires for both the Lakers and Clippers. Miami at the Clippers tonight, of course, at Intuit, and then you have at the staplescrypto.com, Wemby invading LeBron and company there for the other game tonight. Cleveland and Indiana's tomorrow, as I mentioned. OKC at Philly. Phoenix at Atlanta. Sacramento at Milwaukee. Denver at Dallas. And then Wednesday, Knicks and Philly. Orlando at Milwaukee. Memphis at San Antonio. Houston at Denver. Golden State at Minnesota, Miami at LA, the Lakers that is, and then Brooklyn is playing the Clippers, so I'm sure Brooklyn will be playing in LA after that, the Lakers, yes, that Friday. So that is your NBA and NHL schedule. Now, as I get into batter's box and just talk a little baseball, not much to talk about as far as transactions go. It's actually been very quiet. I know we could talk about the big free agents that are still out there, but the one free agent that I want to discuss and has been part of the news cycle is oh, look at this. I didn't realize that this came up. Blue Jays signed Jeff Hoffman, the former reliever for the Philadelphia Phillies. 3-year, $33 million deal. I guess he's going to be a closer. All right, big whoops to him. So kudos. And then the Orioles, when I talked about them last week, as they had signed a pitcher, and it was a little bit too little too late when we talked about it, but now they re-signed reliever Andrew Kittredge, who was formerly of the Cardinals and Tampa Bay Rays. So I guess the Orioles now trying to make up for lost time here in the process. But we still have no word on Alex Bregman, still no word on Roki Sasaki. But Pete Alonso I want to discuss because we talked about the offer a couple weeks ago. The Mets reported 3 years for $90 million, which I'm sure was an insult to Scott Boras and company. But now if you're Pete Alonso, when do you step in to say, let me sign a 3-year deal and let me get opt-outs after each year? So let's just say, for argument's sake, Alonso has a monster year next year and hits 45 bombs, drives in 110, all right, hits 260, which is not much to talk about, but he has big offensive numbers, puts up a big-time year, and now he can look at that year and say, all right, I'm going to opt out and sign for a bigger deal. Or if he has a year like this past year where he hits 37, 95, bats 230, 240, and obviously is not getting the big payday right now. And mind you, he's 30 years of age? I believe he's turning 31 this upcoming year because I believe he just turned 30. Maybe you put forth that deal because I don't want to hear Boras and all of the prognostications and him breaking out the PowerPoint and the binder with all the stats on why Pete Alonso deserves a 6, 7, 8-year deal worth well over $200 million. I don't want to hear that. If you're Pete Alonso, you tell your agent, I want to sign with the Mets. I want to do an opt-out after each year. Give me the 30. Maybe let's try to get $35 million. So if you get 3 for 105 with an opt-out after this year, you sign for it right now. And even that may be too rich for the Mets' blood. But again, the Mets have done nothing. Juan Soto and that's it. And I don't want to hear about the pitchers they brought in. I don't want to hear. No. Enough. If you're Steve Cohen and Pete Alonso, and this goes to show you how much they may love Pete as a person, but they don't like him as a player as far as the numbers maybe that were thrown around early on during this free agency process to where it gets to a point where, all right, we'll give you more money annually, but we're going to give you less years. And if Alonso's not going to take that, then they're going to say, all right, try to find the highest bidder. And I don't know any other rumors or any other teams that said, yeah, we want Pete Alonso on the team. Let's put forth a 5-year deal worth X amount of dollars. I haven't heard that. Have you? So, to me, this boils down to the player now. Forget about Boras. Forget about his team. Forget about representation. He should go to his agent right now and say, Scott, I want to sign with the Mets. Let's do this with an opt-out, and let's call it a day. Get this over with. It's already the middle of January. Before you know it, pitchers and catchers are going to report, and then the position players are going to follow suit. In fact, a month from now is when pitchers and catchers are going to report. So stop fooling around. Let's get this over and done with. To get Alonso in that lineup, to go with Vientos, to go with obviously Soto, to go with Lindor, to go with Nemo, to go with Alvarez, and that's it. Now, let me get to the Australian Open as the first Grand Slam of the tennis year has commenced, and you already have an upset. No, not Novak Djokovic, who won his first round contest. No, not Carlos Alcaraz, who did the same. No, not Coco Gauff, as she beat Sofia Kenin. No, not Iga Świątek, who also won her first round match. Not any of those players. I get it, he was ranked as high as 5th, I believe as early as maybe 2 years ago, but Stefanos Tsitsipas out. Alex Michelsen, the 20-year-old who beat Tsitsipas, and Tsitsipas has been awful over these years. This is a guy who's made it to quarterfinals and semifinals of Grand Slam tournaments, but over the last year, he has certainly fizzled out. He has not been the same player for whatever the reason, and here, just early yesterday, down under, loses in 4 sets to Michelsen. So let's see if he could build some momentum to get maybe past the next round to a 3rd round. But Tsitsipas from Greece, very good player, and like I said, was ranked as high as 5 as early as a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, now out of the Australian Open. So you already have an upset 24 hours plus into this tournament. Let's see if that can continue as we try to get some traction and see where the Australian Open will take us here over the course of the next 2 weeks down under. But that's what you have there in the sports world, people, and that's what you have with this podcast. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review, people, just to increase the visibility of this podcast, as well as go to the YouTube channel at JReels. I put up my first live stream the other night. It was impromptu. I know I didn't forecast it. I didn't even know that I qualified for a live stream segment on my YouTube channel, but I certainly have. And trust me, moving forward, whether you watch on YouTube or go to any of my social media accounts, whether that's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1, just a number. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the jreelspodcast@gmail.com. But certainly keep tabs. And I know I haven't really given a lot of love on my Instagram JReels Podcast account, but I do post stories on there, and I will keep you abreast of what's happening, especially with live streams, because I want to make everybody assured that if I'm going to go live, I want everybody to know ahead of time so you can come on board and check out what it is I have to say about what's happening. And on top of that, again, like I said, subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it, because if you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA. Going on 1 year doing this full time, trying to be gainfully employed, which I haven't as of yet. Go to drinkolipop.com. Go to betterhelp.com/JReels. Go to the YouTube channel. You'll see the descriptions there, where if you go, I'll get a kickback from that. 15% off your order on Olipop soda, which is a good soda for your gut. Prebiotic soda has no artificial ingredients, only 1 teaspoon of sugar per serving. I get it. You may drink the regular brands that we've come to know and love and grow up on, but ditch those. Those sodas have 9 grams of teaspoon or 9 teaspoons per serving. Kick that can down the road and go to drinkolipop.com. Save 15% off your order at checkout by using the promo code JReels. And of course, for those who are going through tough times, for those who need to have a voice, someone that is going to be very impartial and unbiased, go to betterhelp.com. They have great ratings, people. And when you do so, go to betterhelp.com/JReels. You'll get 10% off of your first month by going to betterhelp.com. So please go to all those outlets. Go on my show notes there, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, or even YouTube. Because like I mentioned, as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and this camera, I am going to bring the pain, the passion, fire, fury, energy with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels Podcast, on the flip, baby.